And today we're doing a 3-part series all about writing a novel for beginners. And I say for beginners because it's going to have a lot of writing 101 type stuff, but I think you'll get a lot out of it if you've been writing for a while as well. We're going to start with the idea and coming up with it and brainstorming and plotting all the way to writing, editing, and then even publishing your book. We're going to cover that entire thing. Part 2 is going to be all about advice and encouragement and just everything that I wish I would have known and that helped me as I was getting started, and also a bunch of other writers chime in as well in that video. And then part 3 is about resources. So I'm talking like everything that can help you get better at writing your book and finishing your book. And that's going to include things like Authortube and classes and books and NaNoWriMo and just like everything that I can think of, paid and free. All right, let's do it. There are pretty much 5 steps to writing a novel, and that's way oversimplified, but we'll dive much deeper into it. The very first step is coming up with your idea. And for a lot of you watching this, this is probably right where you are right now. Like you have kind of a general idea or some like pieces of it floating around that you're just not sure how to string them together into an actual story, but you have kind of a concept. And if you don't have a concept, just know that ideas are a dime a dozen. You can brainstorm them all the time. The best way to brainstorm ideas is just to make space for yourself to actually do that. But just in case you need help coming up with a story idea, I did want to touch on it really quick, and that is simply to say that it's easier than we think. Like we get really freaked out about it. We're like, oh, this is so hard. What if it's not perfect? Let go of the perfectionism and just kind of brain dump whatever comes to you. Make a space and be really intentional about actually sitting down to brainstorm, and more will come to you than you think. Just think, what if this happened? What if that happened? That's one of the best things you can do, is ask the question, what if? And ask the question, how could this be even better? How would this make me interested in the story? Just asking questions like that and brainstorming and making the space to brainstorm is really all you need. And just know that ideas don't come out perfectly formed. Like that's probably the biggest thing that holds writers back, is they expect the idea to just, kind of pop out like an egg and it's just fully formed and it's done. But really, brainstorming is kind of putting the egg together. You're like, okay, here's the shell. I got kind of like a shell thing going on, and here's the color of it. And then here's kind of what's going to be on the inside, the yolk, I think. And then this is going to be, and you just keep going like that. And brainstorming is putting together something out of pieces. So don't put that weight of perfectionism on yourself and try to like pop out the perfect idea all in one. It will almost never happen that way, although it does sometimes. And if you're like in the shower or you're trying to fall asleep, sometimes those are when the best ideas come to you. So just be receptive to that, and maybe have a notebook that you kind of dedicate to writing down ideas, and let yourself brainstorm over time and put things together in that way. So that's coming up with the story idea and the very initial concept. But pretty quickly after you get a concept that you like and you feel attached to, you need to move to step 2, which is the planning stage. And you notice that I did not say plotting because it's a little bit different than plotting, although plotting can fall under this. But there are usually 2 camps of writers. They are the plotters, who basically plot every single beat of the story to different extremes. And then there are the pantsers, who kind of fly by the seat of their pants and they just wing it and they see what happens. However, even pantsers, who are flying by the seat of their pants, should have a general plan, like a very basic beginning, middle, and end. It's really helpful to know where you're going. My favorite example of this, and I can't remember where I heard it, but is the GPS analogy. And so like I'm in Minnesota, and if I'm here in the middle of the US and I know that the end of my novel is California and I plug it into my map, I will start heading in that direction. But if I don't plug in a destination, I could very easily go the opposite direction and head towards like New York or something instead. And so just knowing a general plan and where you're going is so helpful. Now I have an entire video right here all about making a plan, so I'm not gonna go super in detail here. Instead, I'm just gonna link it below for you to watch later. But I really wanted to bring it up because whether you're a pantser or a plotter, there is no wrong way. And here's the most interesting part, you can change over time. So I have gone between pantsing and plotting back and forth depending on the book and what it needed and what I needed at that time. And so right now, I personally am a little bit of a mix of the two, but I found that whenever you get stuck, it's probably when you're doing the opposite of what you need. So for people who are pantsing and they get stuck, I always suggest try some plotting. See if you can plot out where you need to go next. And I do that for myself by doing things like bullet pointing, or by using the Save the Cat beat sheet, which we will talk about a ton. Or maybe you get stuck when you've been plotting too much and you're kind of getting stuck in the planning process and you've just been living there. Then it can be really helpful to get unstuck by just pantsing it. Just like go for it and see what happens and let the story come to you. And so I really think my favorite advice here is to just try things and don't lock yourself in. And don't feel like there's any right way, but instead be really honest with yourself and look at what is holding me back, and should I try something else? And give yourself that freedom to try things and just pay attention to what's working for you. If you're brand new to writing and you're not even sure which camp you fall under, or if you're somewhere in the middle, you'll probably realize pretty quickly which one is your preference. All right, so pantsers are pretty self-explanatory. You're just winging it, so you're literally gonna dive in and start writing. But if you're a plotter, there are so many amazing resources out there on all the different ways that you can plot your book. There's so many techniques and ideas and strategies, like the 3-act structure or the Save the Cat beat sheet, which we will talk about all of these things in depth. But I just want to encourage you, don't lock yourself into anything and don't feel like there's any right way to plot your book. Honestly, the best way to plot your book is the way that works for you. So I'd encourage you, I know I'm jumping the gun on the encouragement a little bit, but I would encourage you guys to just really give yourself the freedom to explore and try things and see what works for you. I have written 10 books now, I think, and I have found that every single book is a little bit different, and I've had to do it differently and approach it differently. Sometimes I'm pantsing it like we talked about, and sometimes I have to plot it hardcore, and a lot of times I actually go back and forth between those two things throughout the entire writing process. So just be encouraged that there's no one right way, and that the best thing you can do for yourself is try things and pay attention to what works for you. All right, once you have come up with your story idea and then you have planned it out to whatever extent that you wanted to plan it out, the third step is actually writing, or what is often called drafting your novel, the very first draft. Oh my gosh, this is probably the most important thing I'm gonna say in this entire video, and if you get nothing else out of this video, I hope you'll hear me on this. Your first draft is not your finished book. It's not done. It's nowhere close to done. I really feel like I need to repeat that. Like it's not the final book. When you write the end, you're not done. It's something that almost every single writer has run into. They just assume that when you get from the beginning to the end, the book is done. And you're not alone in thinking that, but it's not the case at all. And I remember one time I said this in a video, and I said, every first draft is kind of garbage. It's a little bit of a dumpster fire. It's just how it is. I remember this person commented and they were all worked up about it. They were like, that's not true because such and such author wrote their book in a day and then they were published. And so I looked up this author actually, and I found that they were published by one of the big 5 publishers. And so I guarantee you, every single one of the big 5 publishers has an editor that the author has to work with, and they have to go through edits. They go through developmental edits, they go through copy and line edits, and then they go through proofreading edits. And so there's at least 3 rounds of edits, if not many more, before a book is considered done in the publishing world. And so I just want to really hammer that home, that your book is not done as a first draft. And that is because honestly, nothing comes out perfect the first time. Like, you might have a really nice sentence here and there, but even if you've been writing 20 books, 30 books, etc., you still need to edit, because you will always find things that you could have said better. And so it's not just for you to come across better, you know, for your own sake, but it's also for your reader. You want to make the book the best that it can possibly be. We'll talk about first drafts a lot more in part 2, but it's just probably the biggest area where writers struggle, because especially with your very first book, it can feel so frustrating when it's not coming out perfectly and you feel like it has to be perfect the first time, but it does not have to be perfect the first time. Because my favorite analogy is that your first draft is kind of like a skeleton. And so you're just getting the bare bones of the story, story out. It's literally just white bones and it doesn't look like a person. It is not done. It's clearly not a fully formed person, and we all know that, right? And so it gives you that freedom to be like, I'm just writing the bare bones. It's fine. I'm just figuring out, you know, what the skull looks like and the rib cage, and okay, I'm getting kind of weird here, but you get the idea. And then when you come back to edit your story later on, that's when you add things like the muscles and the flesh and the organs, and proofreading is like when you're putting the makeup on, and that's just like my weird analogy. I know it's kind of gross, but that is the best way that I can think of to describe it that can give you that sense of freedom when you're writing the first draft, to not stress so much about making it perfect. Oh, first drafts. Again, we're going to talk a lot about first drafts, because this is where most writers get stuck. Honestly, a lot of writers will just keep writing the first chapter, the first 2 chapters, and they will never get to the end, but you need to write that entire story, beginning, middle, and end, to truly understand how to write a novel, how to create a fully formed story, and how to understand how to write a climax and how to fix the saggy middle. And all of these things are so important to learning how to write. After you have a first draft, that is when you get to step 4, which is editing. And so I kind of touched on this already when I talked about the gross skeleton analogy, where you're putting on, you know, the muscles and putting in the organs. And by that, I mean, you are maybe making the characters a little more round. You are fleshing out what the world looks like. And maybe you're fixing a bunch of plot holes. And oh my gosh, this ending needs 5 more scenes or something like that. Those are the kind of things that you fix during edits. I do have an older video on how I edit, which I will link below, but there's basically 2 types of editing. There are self-edits, which are you, obviously, and then there are other people's edits, but I prefer to call that other people's feedback, because they are not actually doing the work for you. You still need to take their feedback and decide if you want to make that edit or not. I want to break these 2 things down even more, because self-edits are like the things that you are aware of. Like, you read through your novel after you've got your first draft and you're like, okay, I don't know how to write a world. I need to research world building. I need to add in a lot more detail. I need to add in more scene setting. Everybody's in, you know, a blank room, and I need to kind of help them picture it. Like, the things that you're aware of, or maybe, you know, you read through it and you're like, okay, there's a big plot hole here because this character's here and then they disappear and I never say where they go. Those are the kind of things that you're aware of. And so you do self-edits first. And I always say do those first, because you don't need other people to tell you about them. So if you ask other people to read your work before you do the work, then you're just wasting your time and theirs, because you already know about it. I like to do at least 3 passes on my own, if not many more than that. It's kind of hard to nail it down, because sometimes you're editing really big picture and sometimes you're reading really detailed, but I like to go through it a bunch, and I can do more videos on editing if you want. I'm going to put together an editing playlist, because I have a lot of videos that can fall under this category, such as my show versus tell video, and I'm also going to be doing videos soon on overwriting and on underwriting. So definitely check out my editing playlist if that's the stage you're in, because I really think that those can be some amazing places to start when you're doing self-edits, especially the very first self-edits, to look at where you can add things and where you can delete, and then to look at show versus tell. Those can be really great places to start. But really, a lot of people edit differently. So just be aware, again, that there's no right way. You're not locked into doing this in any particular way. Some people like to edit for everything at once, and other people, like me, like to edit for one thing at a time, or at least I try to, and it helps me to get more focused. So again, pay attention to what works for you, kind of watch what is helping you edit better, and do your research and learn all the things that you can edit in your story on your own. But once you've done all the edits that you know how to do, that's when you bring in other people's feedback. And there are actually 3 types of feedback. I'm going to break this down even more, because when it comes to feedback, there are beta readers, or sometimes people even call them alpha readers in certain cases. We'll talk about that. Then there are critique partners, and then there are editors. So I'm going to dive into each of these 3 things, because they're all a little bit different and they're all going to help you in very different ways. Let's start with beta readers, because I, again, have a playlist all about this, and it's because I love working with beta readers, but it's actually one of the processes that I found the most confusing when I started out. So I created a bunch of videos to help other people with all the questions that I had. If you guys have heard of beta testing before, it's literally just something you do with a group of people before a product is ready, to find all the problems it has, so that once you launch it, you don't find out then. So it's literally just working with a group of readers before you publish, because you'd rather find out all the problems before publishing instead of in the reviews after publishing. If you want to know more about beta reading, I will link the videos below for you about how to find beta readers, how to work with them, and how to process their feedback after. But really, it's just a really fun process of figuring out all the issues with your story before publishing and fixing them so that you don't hear about them in the reviews later. And so I personally like to do beta readers a little bit more towards the end, like right before I work with an editor, because I want to give them as polished a story as possible. But you can also work with beta readers at the beginning, at the middle, at the end. You can have multiple groups of beta readers. You can have small groups, big groups. There's no one right way, but the point is just to figure out the problems in your story. This is not a fan group to go and rave about how awesome you are. Now, if they like things, that's really good to know. That can be really encouraging, but you are working with them to find the problems. And the thing that you guys need to realize is that if you're too scared to do beta readers now and get that feedback now, you're just hurting yourself, because you will get that feedback after publishing in public reviews. So if you are scared about the beta reader process, just ask yourself, which is worse? To hear about it privately from somebody that you trust and you can fix it, or to hear about it publicly from an angry 1-star review on Amazon? That should help you decide. One other question I get asked all the time is, when do I do beta readers? And I kind of touched on this already, but after you've done everything you know, because again, you're just wasting people's time if you ask them to tell you things that you already know. So I personally like to do beta readers right before I work with an editor, but after I work with my critique partners. And so that leads to critique partners. And again, this is one that people kind of overcomplicate, but it's really right in the name. They critique your work, and they are your partner, which means that you are also critiquing their work. So this is just implied in the name that it's another writer. They are somebody who you swap stories with, and usually they're somebody who writes the same genre and kind of is at the same writing level as you. So that's one really big difference between critique partners and beta readers, is that a beta reader can be literally anybody. They're just a reader. And a critique partner, on the other hand, is a writer, somebody that you partner with, and so more often somebody that you trust and work way more closely with. And the other differences can be that they're going to be a lot more detailed, just because they're a writer too. So they understand story structure and dialogue and characters and world building, and they're going to be able to hopefully point these things out to you that beta readers might not see, but then also hopefully help you figure out how to improve on them. And so think of a critique partner as a much more personal relationship with somebody that you're going to trust a lot. And so it's kind of like dating or finding a best friend, where it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like beta readers where you just kind of have a group of people. It's like a more one-on-one relationship where you are also helping them. And so everybody gives feedback differently and takes feedback differently, and it might take a few tries to find a good fit. You can have just one critique partner or a bunch of critique partners, but the reason they are so helpful is because, again, they have a lot more expertise than beta readers, and they're going to be that person who you can bounce ideas off of. You can work with them at the beginning of the process, the middle of the process, the very end of the process. They are going to be there for you, and you are going to be there for them. If you don't have a critique partner and you want to start looking for one, I would suggest that you start making writing friends and just get to know people. That's the first step. I'll talk a lot more about that in part 3 in the series, but I would also just encourage you to look for people who are writing a similar genre to you, because then they will understand genre expectations and be able to much better help you. And I would also suggest looking for somebody who's in the same stage as you. So if you're a brand new writer, or if you've been writing a couple books, or if you've written a lot of books, I would look for somebody who's in kind of the same writing stage as you and who writes at the same speed even. You don't necessarily want to pair up with somebody who's sending you chapters once a year and then you're sending them chapters every single week. That's not always the best fit. The more that you can be in the same place, the better fit it's going to be. And before I move on to editors, I did mention alpha readers, which are kind of a mix between beta readers and critique partners. Like, they're going to come in sooner, hence the alpha instead of beta, kind of like critique partners at that stage in the process, but usually you're not swapping with them. They're still just readers, although they might also be writers. Last but not least is the editors. And so I really want to touch on this, and guess what? I'm going to break it down even more. I'm talking about professionals, professional editors who know the business, who understand the Chicago style of editing, style manual. Dang it. I can't remember. Anyway, whatever. These are trained professionals who have studied story structure and sentence structure and writing in general. They know grammar, they know formatting. These are the people that you need to go to when you want to make your book perfect. And so I personally like to do editors after I work with critique partners and beta readers. Just a quick note, if you are looking to traditionally publish, then this is something your publishing house does for you. So please do not hire an editor. You don't need to. Your publishing house will hire an editor for you. You can focus on beta readers and critique partners and get so much value from that. But if you are planning to self-publish, this is absolutely crucial, especially for your debut novel, because you would be shocked how many rules and requirements there are for publishing that you just don't know. Nothing says this book is self-published more than something with terrible, awkward formatting, really bad grammar, riddled with typos, and all that jazz. So please, please, please hire a professional to help you. But with editors, I have to break it down even more because there are 3 different types of editing, or 4, depending on who you ask. It is complicated, especially because every editor kind of calls it a different thing and they all think that they are the one that is right. So I'm going to tell you what I most often hear them called and give you an idea of what exactly that entails so that you can know what to ask for and what you need. The first type of edit that an editor might do is called the developmental edit. Developmental edits are very, very, very big picture. I'm talking about like story issues, maybe the story structure or the plot has a problem, character issues, world building issues, maybe big plot holes, everything that's like very big picture. They are not doing typos. They're not doing sentence structure. They're not even helping you with style usually. They're just very big picture and they're helping you make the story a story. And then the second one, which can often be also a third, depending on who you ask, is copy editing / line editing. Again, if you Google copy editing and line editing, you can see that it really varies depending on who you ask. And so every single article that I read on Google was different and said it differently. And that's the case with pretty much every editor that you talk to as well. But here is kind of the general thing. Line edits are what they sound like. It's going line by line. And so it's a lot of style stuff. It's a lot of making sure that each sentence is good. It's much more detailed than the developmental stuff. So technically, although a lot of editors are very helpful and they'll point out developmental issues, they don't have to technically, because line editing is more at the sentence level. So technically it's also not typos, but again, if you have a good editor, they're probably going to point out the typos because it's still an issue. So you can probably already see what the problem is that it's kind of, there's a lot of overlap. And so the copy edits are often seen as the same thing as line editing. They kind of go interchangeably for a lot of editors and they're like, that's the same thing. Don't worry about it. It's all about, style and getting the line by line right and doing that copy. But certain people, I have found it the hard way, see copy editing almost the same as proofreading. So the last but not least is proofreading, which is your very last polishing of the story. So you're not even worried about sentence structure anymore unless it's really obviously bad. You're looking for things like typos and really awkward grammar and maybe formatting issues, and then things that I've heard recently called echoes. So an echo is where you have a word and then you repeat that word later on down the page, maybe multiple times if you're like me. So very, 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 very detailed. That's proofreading. So if developmental edits are the big picture stuff towards the beginning of your editing process, and proofreading is the very, very, very detailed stuff at the very end of your editing process, then that middle ambiguous area between the two is your copy edits / line edits, or sometimes copy edits overlap more with proofreading, depending on who you ask. And so obviously it's very complicated. So the best thing that you can do, and my best advice, is to do a ton of research and ask every editor to be very, very, very clear on what they do. Just know that most editors say something different. It's totally normal for every single editor to have a slightly different definition, but as long as you are on the same page as them, that is what counts. There's also going to be a wide range of prices and expertise in this field, and so my best advice to you is do a ton of research. Definitely make sure to talk to more than one editor. Talk to a wide range of editors and get an understanding for the different prices and the different levels of detail that they do, and have them do sample edits edits, which by the way is very, very common, and almost every editor that I've talked to is willing to do a sample edit so you can get a feel for how they actually edit. Last but not least, I would just let you know that typically developmental edits are the most expensive. Copy and line edits are really random in the middle. Again, it depends on how much expertise and how much detail they do. And then proofreading tends to be the cheapest of all the three options. But what I would really recommend is look honestly at your work and ask yourself, what do I need? If you're a brand new writer, you might need a developmental editor. You might need somebody to tell you what is going on with the story. You might need a professional to help you with that. But if you are further on down the road and you understand writing more, you might not need that. You might need more of the line edits to help you. So take a very honest look at your work and decide. One quick note before we move on to the last step, this should go without saying, but between every edit that you do with other people, the beta readers, the critique partners, the editor, you should be doing self-edits. So your beta readers are not changing it for you. You have to change it. And usually you have to do multiple passes again. And then your critique partner is not changing it for you. You have to do the edits. And even your editor, I would really recommend, although editors will offer to do that for you, I would recommend that you make the changes, because how else are you going to learn? Like if you just click accept all changes in Microsoft Word and let it happen on its own, or you let them send you a edited document all clean and ready to go, that's not helpful to you. You need to learn from their editing notes. And so I always suggest that you do self-edits between every single round, including even at the very end after your proofreader has read it. You read it again and edit again, because you'll probably find things that they miss, because everybody is just human. So the more passes you can make, the more polished your story is going to be. Whew. All right, that leads to step 5, which is the last one, but make sure you stay tuned until the end, because I will share with you how I go through these steps in my particular timeline. But step 5 is publishing. And so of course you guys know this, there are 2 routes. There's traditional publishing or there is self-publishing. And so I have friends who traditionally publish. I'm going to talk a lot about that in our resources in part 3, but I also have a lot of knowledge about self-publishing, because that's the route that I chose to go. And so I will link below a few helpful videos on self-publishing, such as how hard is it to self-publish. I will link that below, and I also have a playlist all about self-publishing if you want to check that out and watch it all the way through. All right, so that's the 5-step process. Just to review, we've got number 1 is the story idea, coming up with it. Number 2 is planning it out and figuring out how you're going to write it. Number 3 is actually writing that first draft. Number 4 is editing and all the many, many, many types of edits that go under that umbrella. And last but not least, number 5 is publishing your book in whichever way that you want. So as promised, the way that I go through these steps is that I go pretty quickly at first. Brainstorming is tricky to pin down because I usually have an idea for a while before I'm ready to start working on it. But once I start the planning process and I start plotting out my story, I typically take only 1 to 2 weeks to plot it out before I dive into the first draft. And then once I do the first draft, I like to do what's called fast drafting, which is something I picked up from National Novel Writing Month in November. Again, we'll talk about all of this in the resources, but fast drafting is simply writing it as fast as you can. You sit down and you just work on getting the words on the page and worrying about making it perfect later. And so I typically can write a book between 1 to 2 months. I can write that first draft in a month to 2 months, depending on how long the book is. And then editing is much, much longer. So typically from when I first start writing to publishing is about a year exactly. And so I found that editing can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. I can take months off to do other things, but typically I need a lot more time to edit because, like you guys saw, there's a lot that goes into that stage. So I typically will edit for a month on my own, and then I will edit for my critique partners and send to them. Then I will edit with their feedback another month. Then I will take a month or 2 to send to beta readers, depending on how much time they need. Then I will edit another month with the beta reader feedback, followed by another month for sending to my editor. And last but not least, after I edit another month or so, I will end up working on the last proofreading edit over the final month. I lost track of how many months that was, but it should be about a year. If you guys want help making a publishing plan and timeline for yourself, I have a video right here, which I will link below for you that you can go watch next, which is just all about how to set up each of these stages so that you can actually figure out how much time you need from starting your book all the way to publishing, and you can even set a tentative release date today. This video is just going to be packed with writing advice, and I'm also going to share stuff I've gotten from books on writing craft and from other author tubers that I've picked up, just everything that I've really picked up in the last few years of writing seriously. But I actually kind of want to start with Pinterest. So I've got my computer here, and I actually am going to do a screen recording so we can just do this together, and I am going to show you my Pinterest, which the reason I'm starting with this is because that's where I started when I was a brand new writer looking for motivation and inspiration. And I, you know, after I began reading some books and I began watching Authortube, but this is kind of where I started. And so some of my favorite writing advice is actually here on Pinterest. So I have a board, I'm just going to zoom through this, called When I Write. That's just what I named it like 3 years ago when I started. I was like, when I write, this is what I want to remember. And there's a lot of things I save on here. I save random character names, and I save how to do more specific things, but I also save my favorite quotes. So a lot of quotes on Pinterest are about the first draft, such as this one. Every first draft is perfect because all a first draft has to do is exist. I'm gonna actually scroll through these because there's so much about the first draft. Don't be afraid to write crap because crap makes great fertilizer. I love that. There's actually a really good quote here by Lamott. Very few writers really know what they are doing until they've done it. Butt in chair, hands on keyboard. This is an acronym, BICHOK, that you'll see a lot. It's just butt in chair, hands on keyboard. Like, the way that you get it done is to just do it. And we're going to talk more about that because honestly, the best way to learn is just by doing. So many of us have learned this the hard way, that the best way to learn how to write is to actually sit down and do it, to have the butt in chair, hands on keyboard mentality and just go for it. And a lot of people said this in the Instagram polls, but I think Ingrid said it my favorite. She said, how true learning by doing is for writing. No matter how much you read, and I will add to that, no matter how much you research, no matter how much you create Pinterest boards, no matter how much you talk to writing friends and talk about being a writer, no matter how much you do all this other stuff, you just have to write to learn how to write. Like, you just have to do it. This is another great quote to emphasize that point. Start writing no matter what. The water doesn't flow until the faucet is turned on. Or this one, which is a little bit more encouraging than the first drafts are crap kind of stuff, which is first drafts don't have to be perfect. They just have to be written. And one of the biggest roadblocks, I guess you could say, to writing, to just sitting down and writing, is often we don't feel like it. So just know that if you don't feel like writing, you're actually not alone. You're totally normal. This is one of my favorite quotes that helped me with that feeling, which is, the desire to write actually grows with writing. Part of writing is actually a discipline, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I'm transitioning away from Pinterest already into my feelings, but I just really want you guys to know that it's totally normal to not always feel like writing. And if you wait for the muse to come, you will probably write like once or twice a year, honestly, because it's just not something you usually feel like doing before you're doing it. And sometimes not even during the writing process. In fact, my favorite feeling is actually right when I've just finished writing. That's probably how I feel the best because I've accomplished it and I can see how far I've come. But prior to that, it's hard. And speaking of discipline, this is another one of my favorite quotes here. Being a good writer is 3% hard work and 97% not getting distracted by the internet. I wish that wasn't true, but that is pretty accurate. This is another quote that addresses first drafts. You might not write well every day, but you can always edit a bad page. You can't edit a blank page. And so this is, again, just more motivation for how we need to get words on the page before we can make them good words. Like, we have to have something to work with, some clay to form. And that relates to this quote, which I've seen tons of different times. I have it saved on my Pinterest board in like another picture, but it says, I'm writing a first draft and reminding myself that I'm simply shoveling sand into the box so that later I can build castles. All right, last one from Pinterest before we move on. This one I just felt like we should touch on because it'll make everybody feel better. Every writer I know has trouble writing. I feel like the theme of this video is you're not alone. You are not alone. It's going to be okay, because we have all been in your shoes, and what you're feeling right now, when you go through the lows, when you go through the highs, we've been there. It's normal. Okay, I lied. One more. This is Lamott again. She is amazing, the author of Bird by Bird. She says, almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. You need to start somewhere. So that reminds me of this thing called the taste gap. This is a long one, but it's worth hearing. So just bear with me and really let this sink in. Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone had told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there is this gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting, creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have the special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And if you are starting out or you are still in this phase, you gotta know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap. And your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I have ever met. It's gonna take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just gotta fight your way through. Go out and find quotes like these that speak to you personally, things that address your fears and your doubts and your insecurities about writing. And what I did personally is I would write those quotes and put them on my wall, whether on a sticky or something nicer. It really doesn't matter. And I would, again, obviously save them on Pinterest. If you want to go make a Pinterest board, definitely do things like that that will remind you, because sometimes we are just really forgetful and we'll be like, yeah, I know that the first draft is crap, but then you sit down and you try to write something that's like absolute perfection because you forgot. You forgot that the first draft is just you getting the words on the page. You forgot that you're just trying to get something out that you can edit later. So give yourself the reminders. You would be surprised how much it helps to have those little reminders front and center. So if you need to have something that's like butt in chair, hands on keyboards, like along the top of your computer, just to remind you, like just sit down and do the work. That's awesome. Like whatever works for you. What works for me is, I've shown you guys this many times before. I made this cute little like tiny picture frame and I keep this on my desk. This has really just helped me because it's such a great reminder to me that nobody really knows what their novel is going to look like in the end. Nobody knows the full, finished, perfect story. They just know the next step, what you can see in your headlights right ahead of you. Okay, now I'm going to kind of go through advice for the different parts of the writing process, and definitely don't tune out if you're not in that particular stage, because you might find that something still applies to you even if you're in another stage. But first is coming up with story ideas and brainstorming. My first tip in this section is to ask questions, and specifically to ask the question, what if? Let's use the Stolen Kingdom as an example for this one, because I asked the question what if a lot when I was world building. And so I asked, what if the Ginny, or the genie, were like a race of people? They were their own separate group, or people group. I guess it's not people, but you get the idea. And, well, then they would have to probably have their own land of some sort, like their own homeland. And what would they look like? And what would their goals be? And how would they interact with people? And like all these questions came into being. And would they still have abilities like genies in other stories? Would they have different abilities? What if some of them had some abilities and some had other abilities? And you follow that rabbit trail and just keep going with it. But then my second piece of advice that is really related to that, and I learned this from an Authortuber who's no longer on YouTube, so I can't remember her name, but she said that you need to not just go with the first idea. Don't even go with the second or third idea most of the time, because those are going to be the most cliche, the most expected. She said keep brainstorming until you have 4, 5, or more ideas, because at that point you will typically have a lot more to choose from, and you can kind of compare which is the most exciting and interesting to you. And often that fourth and fifth idea that has kind of stretched you and stretched your brainstorming will be a lot more exciting and intriguing. My third piece of advice is one that you hear everywhere, and I don't know where it originated, but it is simply that story ideas are a dime a dozen. And what that means essentially is that there's so many writers who are freaked out that their idea is going to get stolen, but nobody can write a story the way that you can. It's not really an idea that makes a good book. It's the execution of the idea and how you write it. Don't stress about if somebody else has the same idea. Honestly, it's just an idea, and it's how you write the story and how you share that idea, your storytelling, that makes the book a good book. I can't tell you how many people have written to me where they're like, I had this idea, but then I saw this author already did it, and so now I can't do it, right? And I'm like, no, it's just an idea. Don't stop writing your idea just because there's something similar out there. Just keep it in mind and make yours totally different, because it's all about how you write it, and nobody can write it quite like you. And so just for an example, I wrote Evelyn's Number, and then I found after publishing, like 6 months after publishing, that there is a very similar story out there with people having numbers, but it's not tattooed on their neck, and the world is totally different, and it's more of a like a love story, and it's just nothing like mine. Like, I read the first few pages and I was like, okay, the synopsis makes them sound similar, but they're worlds apart. They're nothing alike whatsoever. And so I was like, oh, okay, it's fine. The only reason you should be worried is if you are actually directly, intentionally copying somebody. That's the only time I would be worried. Charity Bayliat, I hope I'm saying her name right, said, without conflict, there isn't a story. And I think that's fantastic advice. Emma Woodham said, write what you know. And I love this because, I mean, it's not a requirement, by the way, especially if you're writing science fiction and fantasy, because you're probably not going to know technically a lot of the stuff. You're making it up, like totally creating new worlds. But this idea of pulling ideas from what you already know definitely makes the writing process and coming up with ideas a lot easier. So definitely give yourself permission to pull from your own history and your own wealth of knowledge. Let's talk about advice for plotting / pantsing next, kind of the planning stage in general. Quirky Works, I hope I'm saying that right, says, research multiple plotting styles to find a good fit. Don't just use the first one that you see / find. And I kind of talked about this in part 1 in this series when we were talking about the writing process, and I talked about, like, don't lock yourself into any one strategy or, plotting plan. Give yourself that freedom to try new things, because sometimes the best way to unlock your creativity is actually to try something new. Sarah Creviston Lee says, don't underestimate planning at the beginning, even as a pantser. And JC Scrabba, I hope I'm saying your name right, says kind of the same thing. I wish I knew how important it was to have an idea of the ending, even vaguely. Vaguely? However you say that word. So you guys get the idea. I don't need to repeat this because a lot of people said this, but I personally am a firm believer in planning just enough to get excited and feel ready to write the story. So I have a lot of people who have asked me, how much detail is too much? And it's not so much about, like, do you have too much or not enough? Because there's a lot that you might come up with that won't ever get actually included in the story, and it's good for you to know. But at some point you really do just have to move forward, because it's very, very, very easy to get stuck in one stage. So my biggest advice, honestly, is just get enough. Like, that's going to look different for everybody, because some people are going to need to brainstorm more and other people are going to feel comfortable pantsing. So just get enough for you to feel like, I'm excited about this scene and I think I can write it. That's the amount of detail that you need, because otherwise it can be very easy, like I said, to get stuck in the brainstorming or stuck in that first draft, that first chapter, if you don't continue to try to push forward. So my next bit of advice is to give yourself deadlines and time limits to kind of keep yourself moving forward. Go, okay, I have, 2 weeks to brainstorm, and after that I'm going to start writing. Then it kind of, not only does it put you on a sort of deadline, which will make you kind of push harder, honestly, but then it also forces you to step into the next stage at a certain point. Obviously, these deadlines are movable. Like if you don't feel ready, you can push it back. I'm not saying, you know, get really, really, really strict, but I would say, for example, if you are writing your first draft and you've been writing over a year and you want to speed up and kind of keep yourself moving so that you can get into the next stage, which is editing, then what you could do is set yourself a deadline of, you know, I'm going to finish this draft in a month. That plus writing friends are probably the two biggest things you need to finish your book, to have the accountability and the goal that you're aiming towards, those deadlines. When it comes to first draft advice, we really spent a lot of time on that in the beginning with those Pinterest quotes that I showed you, but I think we should talk about it a little bit more. I have a video on first draft hacks right here, which I will link below. And I have a playlist that's focused on NaNoWriMo, which we'll talk about more, but essentially NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, is about writing your first draft. So all of the tips in this playlist are really zeroed in on the first draft and writing the first draft. So you can click on playlist on my channel and you can click on this NaNoWriMo series to find tons of tips on things like having a plan, don't compare, write what you're excited about, form writing habits and rituals, which will help you get in the zone faster, how to manage your time, how to overcome writer's block, how to overcome doubt and imposter syndrome. I talk about something called rewards, which is essentially giving yourself something to look forward to and be excited about that you get once you complete a certain goal. I talk about growing your word count and writing great chapters and how to do world building. I try not to repeat myself on this channel too much, so go and watch those videos if any of them calls to you. I will link them all below, which leads to the next bit of advice, and that is finish your book. I cannot tell you how many writers, including myself, have spent time just writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting the first couple chapters. Honestly, it's very foolish, and I've done it, so I'm not like criticizing you guys because I've been there. But the reason that this is an issue is because you cannot actually learn how to write a fully formed story and learn about character arcs and story arcs and how to write middles and endings and how to write a character that grows. You can't learn all these essential things if you're only writing the first couple chapters. And honestly, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I don't even get to know my characters fully until I've seen their entire story. I don't feel like I know them just from the beginning. It's like a very surface level relationship at that point. And so the best thing you can do for yourself is honestly to let the beginning be mediocre. Let it be good enough for now, because you can edit it later. That said, I do want to mention that if you do feel the need to edit before you go back into writing, that's okay too. Like, there's no hard and fast rule, and a lot of writers do like to edit as they write, but I would encourage you, if you want to do this, to set time limits and deadlines for yourself in that area so that you just don't get stuck there again. As long as you have a set time limit or a set amount before you move on, you should be okay. Like, for example, I know some writers who will edit for an hour before they write for an hour, or others who will go back and look at just the previous day's work, fix that up a little bit, and then move on. You get the idea. There is no wrong way to do this. You can move forward without looking back, or you can look back occasionally, but the idea is to just not get stuck in one place. That is the goal. When it comes to advice on the first draft, I also think we need to talk about writing sprints. So if you've never heard of a writing sprint or a word sprint, they're called lots of different things. The reason these are so effective is because they push you to write as many words as possible in a very short amount of time. So it's in the name. Again, it's a word sprint, writing sprint. And the idea is it frees you up to not question every single word and slow down, because you have to get as many words as you can in a short amount of time. So it just makes you write faster and not delete and agonize and stress and perfectionize. That's not a word, but it is now. And you get the idea. Different people actually prefer different lengths of writing sprints. So for example, I prefer a little bit shorter because I start to zone out really fast. So if I can do like a 15-minute writing sprint, 10 minutes is a little bit too short for me to get in the zone. 20 minutes is when I have already started fading out, but other people prefer 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Other people might prefer 5 minutes. And when I am in a really big writing slump and I just don't feel like doing it, sometimes I will do 5-minute sprints because just telling myself, I just have to write for 5 minutes. That's not that hard. I can do that. It can really, really help you. So it's motivating. It pushes you to not be a perfectionist. And it also is something you can do with writing friends. And we'll talk more about that in part 3 when we talk about writing friends. One last bit of writing advice for first drafts before we move on to editing is that you should really, really, really save your work. Back up your work, because I can speak from experience and I know many other writers who can as well. It's very easy to lose your work, and I have only lost up to, I think 10,000 words was my worst instance, but that is a big chunk of writing that you never get back. So I would just recommend a few different things. Ever since I lost that 10,000 words, I have started a habit of emailing the document to myself at the end of every writing day. So after I finish a writing session, I email it to myself and I just keep a little folder of all of my work emailed daily over time. Here's one from Instagram that I think we could all benefit from, and that is placeholders. So Cup of Ray talks about how like they use it when maybe they can't picture the rest of the scene, so they're just writing dialogue. That's a great example, but you can do this in any way, shape, or form. So a lot of the time for me, I will use placeholder names. I'll put parentheses about something. I'll be like, figure out name for this place later in parentheses, or in parentheses, describe them later and what they look like. Or what else? I'll put, write this scene later even. I've done that a few times where I'm like, I really don't know what's supposed to happen here. So I just write like a placeholder of, they're going to talk to so-and-so and they're going to do this. And then you move on, because placeholders help you not get stuck. Again, it's all about not getting stuck, you guys. Janine said, trust the process and do what works best for you. And that kind of goes along with what Living in Natalie, I hope I'm saying that right, said, be patient with yourself and enjoy the writing process. And I actually want to jump over to what Hannah Johnson Wright said, because she said something very similar. Find ways to enjoy the process every day instead of only looking forward to the end result. And I think that's really important for all of us to just remember that we got into this because we loved it. A lot of us can get really hard on ourselves and have that writer's guilt, or we just keep looking toward the end and that end goal of whatever publishing. That just takes away the joy of the journey that you're on. So enjoy the moment, enjoy what you're doing right now. And I think this is a great place to add advice from Renee Dugan writing, and she said, fail faster. Absolutely. Like I keep saying, don't get stuck in one place. You're going to fail, but fail faster, because the faster you can mess something up, the sooner you can figure out what it should be. So you might have to write something wrong a few times before you figure out what's right. But if you aren't willing to write it wrong first, you won't figure out what's right. And you do have to go through the failing process to find success. It's just part of the process. So like Renee said, fail faster. Alex Rice and Sing said, write as if no one is watching, because no one is watching. But I think the most important thing to share with you guys is that we all have blind spots and weaknesses. You are not alone. So many of us get imposter syndrome when we see the things that we're not good at. But the thing is that everybody has things that they're not good at. So it's normal to feel that imposter syndrome every once in a while and feel like I'm not good enough. And it's good actually, because it means that you're aware that you have flaws. If you weren't aware that you had flaws and you thought you were the best writer ever, I could pretty much guarantee that you're not the best writer ever. But if you are aware of your flaws, then you are also capable of growing and working on them. And so just know that, number one, you're not alone, but also, just think this through logically. Like if everybody has blind spots and weaknesses, nobody's perfect. Nobody's a perfect writer. Nobody's ever written a perfect book. If you look up Amazon reviews of even your favorite book, I guarantee you'll find somebody who doesn't like it. And so this is the number one hurdle we have to overcome when we are editing, is there is this imposter syndrome that really comes along, at least for me and probably for a lot of you, where we're like, it's not good enough. Maybe I should just give up. But don't let these weaknesses and blind spots make you feel less than, because everybody has weaknesses. You are not alone. You are not different from anybody else. Don't let them stop you from growing and getting better. Instead, use that as your fuel to be like, I'm aware that I have flaws and weaknesses, and now I can fix them because I'm going to learn how to get better at each of these things, and I'm going to get more aware, and I'm going to figure out more of my weaknesses. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but that's how you grow, is by being willing to accept your own flaws and acknowledge them, not let them hold you back. Honestly, this is kind of a life lesson. I have to be real with you guys. There are so many people who they get feedback negative criticism, whatever. And instead of growing from it and learning from it, they go, no, that's not true. You're judging me. And it's not judgment. It's helping you grow. Like if you are willing to acknowledge your weaknesses and accept them and actually see them as a good thing, kind of like Renee said, fail faster, be willing to fail and not get in a funk about it, but instead be like, okay, I just found out about this weakness. And now that I know about it, I can fix it and I can grow. I'm going to get off my soapbox now and we're going to move on to the next tip, which is to simply learn the rules before you break them. And another tip that I have for editing, and this is just my particular process, is I like to personally edit for one thing at a time. So a lot of people might edit for a bunch of things all at once. They might just read through the document, and sometimes I do that and I can't help myself. I need to just kind of hit everything, especially towards the end when you've kind of hit a lot of stuff already and you're just looking for the leftover problems. But in the beginning in particular, I like to edit for, you know, just show versus tell, and then just character issues, and then just world building issues, and then focus on, you know, dialogue, and then focus on the story structure and plot holes and that kind of stuff, and just kind of take it one thing at a time, because I found that that particular way of focusing helps me to really catch a lot more than back when I would try to do everything at once and I just didn't catch as much. So I'm not perfect at it. No writer is perfect. We just covered that. But I really try hard, especially in this latest book, The Cursed Hunter, to do one thing at a time and get really focused. And that has been very beneficial to me. If you want to try this technique, but you have trouble just doing the one thing because you keep seeing other stuff on the side that you want to fix, even just typos or the sentence structure you don't like, I would also recommend that you leave a little note for yourself, either in a notebook, or if you're using Microsoft Word, you can just put a comment. You can use the comment feature. We'll talk about that in a second. And you can just leave a note for yourself to be like, come back to this later. I want to address this. I want to write it this way. I want to add more scene setting. You get the idea. Just leave yourself those notes, because then it's out of your head and you can keep moving forward with the focus that you were currently on. Tip number 70 billion probably at this point is it is okay to use the delete button. When you are first drafting, a lot of writers are very focused on word count and growing the word count. But when you get to editing, you kind of want to do the opposite. The delete button is your friend. And I have found so many cases in my stories when I look back, I'm like, I could have tightened that up. I could have said it with less words. And less is more, you guys. Less is more. When it comes to good storytelling, if you can tighten something up and say the same thing with less words, readers really appreciate that. And something that I'm working in my own writing is to really strip things down and tighten it up so that it says the same thing with less. Less is more. Enough said. Let's move on to some really cool features in Microsoft Word. All right, I want to show you 3 features in Word that I use constantly that people are always asking me about. They're like, what program is that? It's just Microsoft Word, you guys. The track features, the comment feature, and the navigation pane are your best friend. I have my Word document pulled up for The Cursed Hunter, so you guys are going to get to see the first page as of, what day is today? March 11th, 2020. So it's a few months away from publishing. It's not done, but this is what I have right now. So heavy wings beat the hot air. Almost too soft to hear unless you were listening. All right, here's my first issue. I'm going to write this note for myself. Don't say you. Find another way to say it. Okay, so that's just something I want to remember because I think that looks stupid in writing and I don't like it, but I haven't figured out how to rewrite it yet. Okay, and I'm just looking for another place to leave a comment. This one's really easy. Feet are a real world measurement. Try to rewrite with a more fantasy measurement. Okay, so I've got 2 notes for examples in here. I'm going to click through these little arrows and you can actually jump between your comments in here. And so if you would had like 100 comments, you can run through all of them. Let's pretend I misspelled dragon and this is like an M or something instead. Okay, so an editor is going to come along and your editor will turn on this track changes feature. So it has to be turned on for it to work, first of all. But then they're going to go in and rewrite it. And you can see how it changes color and it puts up a little comment on the side, just like the other comments, but it's actually telling you what happened. Deleted this word, replaced it with this word. And so once you have track changes on, you can make a lot of unique changes. You can replace words, you can write in whole new sentence That's horrible. And that's under all markup. But what if you wanted to see, like, what if your editor has written a bunch of new stuff for you and you just want to kind of read it and see, does this flow? Do I like it? You can change it to simple markup. You can even get rid of markup altogether just to get a visual for what it looks like, or to take an Instagram picture. But I personally prefer to see all markup. It gives me just an idea of what I'm working with. And again, track changes is more what your editor's going to use than your critique partner. So if your editor sends you back a document like this where you're like, okay, yeah, I misspelled that word, this is better, whatever it is, and you want to accept it, you just click accept right there. Or if maybe they misunderstood your intentions and you plan to rewrite it differently, you can click reject as well. And then last but not least, I wanted to show you guys under the view tab in the navigation pane, there's a bunch of cool things as well. If you have your document formatted, and I like to personally write in a formatted document, which I will pop up my video on how to do that and link it below for you. Go check it out if you want to do that. But this allows me to pop between chapters really easily and quickly, kind of like Scrivener. And then I also really enjoy being able to click on this one so you can actually scroll through the pages like this, and you can find the page that you want easily. And last but not least, you can actually click this little tabby thing to see how many comments and track changes there are. So if you're working with an editor, you can pop this little box up on the side and you can see that right now I've worked through almost all my notes. So there's only 5 comments and that one little deletion that we just made together. And you can actually see everything here. And this is gonna sound strange, but I actually really enjoy knowing the number of things that I have left to work on, because sometimes I can just be like, I'm gonna do 10 today, 10 tomorrow, or 20 and 20. You know, you get the idea. I can help you kind of figure out how much you have to do. When it comes to beta reader advice, my favorite bit of advice is the rule of 3. And that's basically saying if one person has an opinion, it's just an opinion. Even if 2 people have that opinion, it's still just an opinion. But if 3 or more people have that opinion, generally that's going to be what most of your readers think and how they feel. So for example, if you have 10 beta readers and 8 of them don't like a character because they do something sketchy, then you might want to address that. But out of the 10 beta readers, maybe only 1 person doesn't like that character, then you're probably fine, especially if the other 9 are like, that character is amazing, I love them so much. That rule of 3 is going to help you decide, what do I address, and do I even address it, or is it just their opinion? And this can be especially helpful when beta readers give conflicting feedback, which happens all the time. So use the rule of 3 when you have a group of people giving you feedback and figure out what is the common consensus. But one thing that I haven't put in a video yet, because I am pretty new to it still, is that I have started to use Google Forms to do my beta reader feedback. And the cool thing about Google Forms is that it puts all the information and compiles it for you into one spreadsheet. So in the past, I had my beta readers all sending me their individual Word documents after they finished reading with the questions and answers. And then I would have to take and copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. And it would take me literally a week to get through all that information from all the different beta readers. And it was just such a pain. And so now, when I use Google Docs, I have them answer directly in Google Docs. I just paste a link into the Word document. They click on it, they answer my questions, and then when everybody's done, I just compile their feedback in that one spreadsheet. And all I have to do really is tweak it a little bit to the way that I want it to look and print it. That's it. It saves me a ton of time and work, and I think my beta readers really like it as well. All right, next we have advice for publishing. And so number 1 is do your research. Number 2, do your research. And oh, look at that. Number 3 is also do your research. If you don't know something, I can almost guarantee that you can find that information on the internet if you're willing to put in the time and energy it takes to find it. And so I would go into that in detail, but honestly, I think if you guys are here watching this video, then you probably already know that. So kudos to you. Keep rocking it and keep researching what you need to know. Number 2, self-publishing is not a backup plan. And the reason I bring this up is because there are unfortunately a lot of people who think, well, maybe I'll just self-publish and see how it does, and then I'll try traditional publishing, because they want that speed of self-publishing, but they don't really want to do all the work. They really want the publisher in the end. So go after the one that you actually want, you guys. I don't know how else to phrase that, but self-publishing is not a good backup option for many, many reasons, but there's one in particular that I think you should know. If you're self-publishing a book, you're pretty much guaranteeing that it will never be traditionally published. And I I actually had a chance to listen to a bunch of agents talk about this once at a conference, and they were discussing, you know, generally what would make them even consider a self-published book, because the fact is, once you self-publish, they can see your sales. There is a very clear sales record, and unless a book sells thousands and thousands of copies, they're not going to be interested. They were discussing like what number of sales would make them change their mind and consider, not definitely, but just consider a self-published book. And the very lowest number that I heard was 10,000 or more. And I heard other agents say, nah, I would need it to be like 50,000. And just so you guys have like an idea of comparison, the average traditionally published book sells roughly 2,000 to 3,000 in its lifetime. And I say average because there's more and there's less, but those are the statistics that I've heard. So we're talking like 3 to 5 times more than the average, just to give you an idea. Number 3 is that self-publishing is a long game. And this is true in both traditional publishing and self-publishing, but in different ways. Traditional publishing, it's very much a long game because there's a lot of waiting. You have to query and then wait to hear back. And then if you get an agent, you have to wait to hear from a publisher. And then if you get a publishing deal, you have to wait for it to get published a very long time. And so there's a lot. It's a very long game, obviously. And then for self-publishing, it's a long game when it comes to making money, because there's a lot that goes into self-publishing before you really learn what you need to know, and that struggle is normal. There's really no such thing as an overnight success in publishing. It might look like it from a distance, but if you get to know anybody's story, you will find out very quickly that there are almost guaranteed to be years and years of hard work and persistence that they put in before they became that overnight success. So just be aware of that. And if you're in it for the money, it's probably not the best choice. If you are getting into publishing, especially self-publishing, for external validation, it's also probably not the best choice. Neither of these external motivators, or really any other external motivators, are enough for you to truly succeed and thrive in publishing. So just know that you need an internal motivation if this is going to be a good fit for you. Let's move on to other advice that I think is also important, but that we haven't really had a chance to touch on yet. Number 1 is that writing friends are one of the absolute best resources for helping you finish your book. They are a wonderful soundboard, but they are also accountability, and they are also people who are going through what you're going through and are going to understand it like nobody else. We'll talk quite a bit more about writing friends in part 3 on writing resources, because writing friends are one of the greatest resources you can possibly have, and I want to really dig into how to find them. But the short version, the advice version, is to simply be a friend. I want to bring in a little bit more of that advice from the Instagram poll. So author Brianna Rima said that the best advice is that writing should always come first, before platform and the other extra stuff. And I strongly agree. I actually have a video called Writing Comes First, when I just sort of had that as a revelation, and I realized that I had been doing a lot of the more platform stuff and the things that are more instantly gratifying, the things that you can finish in a day versus a book which can take a year. And it's very easy to do that because, like I said, it's that accomplishment. I personally like to check things off a list, and so I will often do the smallest things first, because then check them off the list, right? And so I would do my Instagram posts and social media and fix my website and you name it, and author newsletter, but those things should come after the writing. And so if you can really prioritize writing, that is going to progress your book along quite a bit faster, because there's always something that's going to not get done. That's normal. That's just life. We all have a limited amount of time, but if you put your book first, then you're much more likely to be guaranteed to get that done versus if you put it last, which a lot of us do. Emily Morgan says, write for yourself first. I completely agree with this one as well. If you are getting a little too focused on what other people want to hear and what other stories are out there, it can really take away that creativity, and it can take away the joy of writing. And so just remember the stuff that you wanted to write and why you got into writing. Part 3, the resources. This video is going to have 5 sections. We're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about something called Authortube. In case you've never heard of it, you are watching it right now, an author on YouTube. We're going to talk about National Novel Writing Month, writing friends, and hold on, courses. Quick shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for requesting this video so many times that I finally buckled down and decided to do it. It took me honestly hours to plot out all these 3 videos for you guys and make sure I covered everything. So I really hope you enjoyed them. Also, right down there is this thumbs up button that you can use and a subscribe button. But moving on from that, let's get into the resources. All right, number 1 is books. I had to grab this off my bookshelf. This is my number 1 recommendation of all time. I cannot promote this book enough, you guys. This is literally the best thing that I have ever read, and I've read a lot of books on writing because I was an English major with a creative writing emphasis in college, so I had a good chunk of books on my bookshelf, but nothing helped me specifically with novel writing as much as this book here. I have a whole Save the Cat playlist here on YouTube with my critique partner, Brittany Wang, where we actually used the beat sheet in this book. There's 15 beats to plot out a novel, and we plotted out a novel together live once a week for 10 weeks. I'll make sure to link that series below, and you can go watch the rest of them from there if you're interested in that. But this book has a beat sheet of 15 beats to plot out your story and make sure that you're hitting all the really major plot points that books have. You'd be surprised how almost every book I've ever read falls into the beat sheet. But I will just say, because there are people out there who are not plotters, and that's totally okay, that if you are a pantser and you prefer to just write your book by the seat of your pants, this can also be very helpful for editing. The first like 3 or 4 chapters are what you have to read to learn the concept and figure out plotting, and then from there on there's about 10 or so chapters about actually breaking down the beats in different types of stories so that you can actually see this in progress and learn from it. Anyway, I will link this book below for you along with all the other books that I mentioned in this video series, but I just wanted to point out that Jessica Brody came on our YouTube channels and talked to Brittany and I over on our Save the Cat playlist.
And we also did this YouTube video together, which I'll link below as well.
My second favorite writing book of all time is Bird by Bird by Lamott, and this is more of a writing encouragement type book. It just really gives you a fun like look inside a writer's head so you can feel like you're not alone. And this is a book that I actually got during college. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have ever heard of it. Just to give you an example from the content section, she has getting started, short assignments, talk about perfectionism. She talks a lot about how to really narrow in on story ideas and get ideas about that, about character, dialogue, how to know when you're done, jealousy even. And we've moved a few times since I last read this, but I used to have a ton of quotes in here. You can see that it's like well loved. There's a lot of comments in here, and I used to write a lot of quotes out and put them on my wall just as encouragement to remind me that this is normal. Everything I'm going through is normal. So this is just, again, huge on encouragement. Another one that I own that I think should be mentioned is On Writing by Stephen King. I've actually not finished reading this because it was along the lines of encouragement, but I preferred Bird by Bird writing style, but some people will prefer Stephen King's writing style, and so I just wanted to give this an honorable mention. And another one on story structure that I also want to give an honorable mention is The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. I hope I'm saying that right. And so this book is another one that I was recommended, and I haven't really finished reading it just because I love Save the Cat so much. But if you are a person who needs to kind of read multiple things, I think this one talks more like 3-act structure and stuff like that. So anything on writing craft that you can get your hands on like this will also be very helpful. And one last book that I want to mention is How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy by Orson Scott Card. He is the author of Ender's Game and a bunch of other novels that I can't think of at the moment, but this is an awesome book specifically for like world building and things like that. This can be really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. This is one that I got in college during my last semester when I let my professor know I wanted to try novel writing, and so this was the recommendation at the time because my professor didn't really know anything about novel writing, and I definitely got a lot out of this book. One other quick honorable mention is the notebooks that I make. These are a lot like bullet journals, so they're just gonna have different sections for word sprints and to-do lists, and right in the beginning there's a tracker and like weekly spreads and things like that. I made 2 versions of the planner. They're exactly the same on the inside. This is the darker cover, and then there's a lighter cover of my favorite picture ever. So if you're curious about this, go check out my website. I will link it below as well. All right, the second one is Authortube. Authortube just stands for Authors on YouTube, and so it's just this little corner of the internet where a bunch of authors try to help each other out by giving advice or just sharing stories or whatever else related to writing. So I'm gonna actually take you over to my computer screen right now, and we're gonna look at my YouTube page. And so here on YouTube, you can see on the right side, I have my favorite YouTubers. Now the trick here is that I have it on rotate because there's too many. So at any point in time, it can change. So what I have to do to show you everybody is I actually have to go in to the customize, and then I have to click on, see it's on shuffle here, it says it on the right, and so you can see all, and now it's changed a little bit, but I'm just going to click see all so that I can show you really quick all the people here, and then you can go to my YouTube channel and click on any of their channels at any time. It's on the right sidebar there, and you might have to rotate it and refresh a few times to see everybody. You can see that I have a little bit of a balance because sometimes it can help to look outside of the writing community, and I just wanted to mention that as well. I just want to point out that you can pretty much find anything you need on YouTube. If you want to search it, you can probably find something to help you, so I just encourage you guys to do that. Oh, and I should probably also say, if you enjoy YouTube videos, you can always check out my channel right here. This is me. I have tons of great videos, and I also make playlists, as you can see, on things like NaNoWriMo, on beta readers, on author life, outlining a novel, writing advice, marketing your book, how to self-publish, etc. So definitely go ahead and check that out too. And the third resource that I want to bring up is courses, but I'm actually not going to talk about this very much because honestly, it's my personal opinion that you can get almost everything you need to know for free. I have a lot of people ask me all the time, do you need to have, you know, an English major or a college degree in general to be an author? And the answer is no. As long as you have willingness to learn and fingers to type and research on Google, you'll be fine. We talked about this during the writing advice video, but honestly, one of the absolute best ways to learn how to write is to just do it. And so that is honestly the best teacher in my opinion. And again, like I said, you can research and learn, but if you want to jumpstart your learning and kind of skip a few steps and learn from somebody who's been where you are, a course can be valuable as long as you make sure you do your research and check out two things. Number one, is it a credible teacher? And number two, are they where you want to be? Because why would you learn from somebody who's not doing what you want to do? So for example, you could take college courses, but I honestly learned very little about writing from my college classes and my professors because they were not doing the type of writing that I wanted to do. They had not been where I wanted to go, so they couldn't help me get there. And then one other course that I have tried is Skillshare, and I honestly wasn't that impressed by it. I just have to be totally honest with you guys. I think that it can be very helpful for learning some things, and there's some cool things about publishing on there and marketing and Instagram and other stuff like that, but there wasn't a lot at the time that I was on it about writing. I don't think there was really anything at the time that I was on there specific about writing. But one class that I have heard a lot of people talk about, and I've heard only good things so far, is Masterclass.
And I don't feel qualified to be a writing teacher. I'm going to be straightforward with you, but if you want to know more about self-publishing, that I actually do have a course on now, and I will link that below. It's on Udemy and also on Writing Mastery Academy, and I would highly recommend it because it's everything that I know about self-publishing.
Number 4 is NaNoWriMo, and I'll just clarify here, that stands for National Novel Writing Month. And National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, which most people call it, is actually in November. So again, let's go to my screen really quick. So NaNoWriMo is something where you can Google and check it out and sign up for it if you want to, but it is something where writers from around the world come together and write their books together. And so it's really an accountability thing and this really fun push. And so just so you guys know, it's not like a competition where you get any reward besides, you know, I wrote a book. That's a big reward. A lot of people think you win something. You don't win anything except the awesomeness of having written a book. And so you can sign in like I am right here, and you can see that right now it's in camp because the official National Novel Writing Month is every November, and writers get together to specifically write 50,000 words. That's the goal. You don't obviously have to do it. Nobody's making you do anything. But I also want to point out that there's actually something called Camp NaNoWriMo, which happens in April and July. And so in Camp NaNoWriMo, it's the same feel. You set up a project. It's your book. In this case, you can see I had one called Too Many Projects All at Once, which was a whole other thing. And I had a goal there, but you can actually create specific goals for you. So if you know that you actually don't want to write, you want to be editing your novel, you can have an editing month, and you can still do and participate in NaNoWriMo. And you can set a word count goal of your own, as it says right here, for any writing project. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go check out the NaNoWriMo website and then go ahead and sign up for it, because there's also this community tab here and forums that you can specifically ask questions and get to know people. There are groups, and you can even find regions and go to your home region and find out about what are the writers in your specific area of the world doing, and can you actually meet in person. You can find out things like that right here. And then of course they also have really cool resources like the pep talks here and ways to prep for the event event, and all these other cool resources. I am definitely going to join the camp, and I'm going to be working on the Enchanted Crown, and I'm currently working on prepping it, but soon I will be in progress. And the cool thing about Camp NaNoWriMo is, you know, the National Novel Writing Month in November is focused on writing, but in camps, you can change it to editing like this, and now I want to edit my 50,000 word novel, and that is actually my goal, so that's perfect. Last but not least is writing friends. So I'm joking with Penny here, but really I do mean human friends who can actually help you with your story and talk to you about story. What's happening? Are you okay? Okay. I kind of gave this away a little bit already, how much they can help you in finishing your book, but that accountability of having other people with you is amazing. I cannot emphasize this enough. It's really helpful to have other people. You're so distracting. Other people are much less distracting than dogs. Hi, thank you. But I just want to encourage you guys, if you're like, I don't have any writing friends, nobody has writing friends when they start out. Everybody starts out without writing friends. The way that you get them is to be a friend and actually go out where other writers are. So if that means going on the NaNoWriMo website and actually connecting with people in the forums, it can take a while to find writing friends you connect with, but you can also find them on social media, on Instagram, for example, on Twitter. There are writers everywhere. So what you need to do to make writing friends is be a writing friend. Ask questions, talk about stories, talk about books you love. Not everybody's going to be a perfect fit, and that's okay. One other place that I'd really encourage you guys to go look for writing friends is actually on my Patreon page. And over on Patreon, we have what I call the Writers Club. And this is just a private writing group that we have over on Patreon. You get access to the Discord group as soon as you join. You just get a link that brings you over to Discord. It's like a chat room for other writers, and we get to know each other. There's tons of cool channels on things like writing and your WIP and drafting and editing and beta readers and CPs and what else? Publishing, marketing, Authortube even. If you're looking to meet writing friends and you want a great place to start, definitely recommend that. Let me just angle this down so you can actually see what's happening here. You little goof. Yeah, you. All right, Penny, we're almost done. I promise we just want to say bye to everybody, okay? So thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate you. Give this video a thumbs up. Oh, don't fall. Don't fall. Oh my gosh. I got you. Okay. You are so strange. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell next to the subscribe button if you want to get notified next time I have a video. You are hanging off the chair. What are you doing like this? You have a lot of trust, my girl. Thank you guys for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon. Bye!